downplaying it being something serious. Anyway, we few but happy few have remained. What would you like to spend the next hour doing? What do you care about most? What do you want to talk about? Hand up, number one.
Hi, I'm Tracy. I work at the University of Waikato, and for me, it's about cultural change, and we struggle to get people to consider other options. You know, even just like our ITS department have just released, Microsoft 365 for students because it's free. Well, they haven't charged us for it. It's gratis. Yeah, not free, gratis. Yes, gratis. And and it's because, that's what a lot of our staff are using, and they like it, and they don't want to change. And and we argued quite strongly for that not to happen. But I just would like to hear some examples of how you help people make crossover, if you like. It's sort of.
I'm actually really keen, because I'm a big fan of nudges and choice architecture ideas about looking at the barriers and why people don't go open. And sometimes it's not a kind of open is bad. Actually, how often would anyone say open is bad, I don't want to do it? And how often is it just all the other factors?
I think it often has to do with this kind of stuff here.
I can't read that from here, Dave. I can't read that and talk to the microphone. Can you?
Closed is control. Sorry. Closed is about having and maintaining control, and open is about the very uncomfortable prospect of releasing control and probably never getting it back again.
Is this from
leaps of faith.
A developer, or?
No, just in general.
Because I guess I wouldn't. I maybe have been in different open conversations. I think it would be less about control, more about risk. When I asked our GCIO guys why we don't use open in government, apart from everyone knows how to use Word and Excel, which is not. There's quite a huge sunk cost already there. But it was around Microsoft, we pay them to manage the risks. I think might have been the answer, or I might be it's a year ago, I can't remember actually. I think Bill.
Hi, this is something else perhaps to add to our open list, and it actually pulls together things from the thread you've just been talking about managing the risk, the monetising, how can people be rewarded from it. Perhaps we need an open evaluation system, because someone can write the best open software in the world and it's useless to me unless I know that people have used it, that it works, that the risk is reduced. Things like trading on TradeMe, it's the feedback system that allows the trader to be evaluated, that reduces the risk and means that you can actually trade with them. And with open software, I go on and download it from one of the places, and I'm looking to see how many people have used it, how many have recommended it. And perhaps that could actually also be tied into a bit of monetisation. I'm quite happy to to pay for open information and open software, but not a lot. And if there is a small click the ticket, which could perhaps be, if people that downloaded software had an obligation, as you have on TradeMe, to give feedback, and on the feedback there was a button, donate 10 cents, nothing to me, but if enough people do it, the developer gets his cash stream.
Sort of the micropayments.
So, just a thought.
And so,
I don't know if it fits into this discussion, but
that kind of comes back to, reminds me of marketplaces, which are not open, like the App Store, or I don't use Android, but the equivalent version, what is it called? Google Play, sorry. Which are not open, presumably, but they provide a curated environment that's set up, and they click the ticket, presumably, to pay for the environment.
And of course, the other way that value is added and the risk is removed is by having a trusted recommender, which is why the academic peer review, if it's published in a journal, there's some credibility there.
Professor Big Name from whatever says this is a good journal, I'm citing it in my paper. So therefore,
It's
my
not
H
100%,
index
but it
goes
gives you a
up.
value.
Yeah.
And there was a question earlier about what's the value of openness. Well, just as one small illustration, I was at the Internet Research meeting last night, and there was a lady whose name I didn't catch, but she has looked at working out the cost just for researchers across New Zealand academia, the likely cost of the TPP if they have to pay more to access journals and other information. And she's worked it out as 140 million a year, and over the 10 years that the costing is doing, that's 1.4 billion extra cost to New Zealand of lack of openness. And I think the benefits are cost is at 10 million, so that's a fair chunk of that gone already.
Yeah. Microphone pass. Yeah.
I guess sort of thinking about the instructions I had before I came, is there anyone wanted to follow on with that point? Because mine's slightly different.
Thank you. Just to point out that openness implies a continuum, not just a feedback, but the fact that the resource, whatever it is, if it's a piece of software or data or whatever, is open implies that people can not just provide feedback, but can go in and fix or change whatever was wrong in the first place. So if you have a resource, or maybe it doesn't extend to works of art, but anything that's open can have community participation in it. So it's not just one person owning and the community feeding back to that person, but the community taking partial responsibility at least for making it better.
And that's adding value. And if those numbers were known, if you had a bit of open software and associated with it was 2 million downloads, 750,000 likes, and 50,000 people contributing to it, then that adds value and reduces risk.
So, yeah, this is just to follow. When you were talking about Trade Me and evaluations and such like, and it made me think of things like open science and open data. So, one of the things that does by putting your work out into the open is it sort of promotes that idea of verification. Rather than saying, hey, I've done this research and here are my claims, it's like, actually, here's all the data that I've been working with, and anybody can go and verify that. And I think it changes the dynamic of, it's not so much honesty, because that sort of suggests that there's necessarily some dishonesty in the past. And I don't think, for a lot of people that's been the case. But sometimes it's like, well, I've been given this grant and this is what I was trying to find, and, I might just fudge some of that stuff because... but perhaps because it's not so much that it didn't prove what I was aiming to prove, but we weren't actually able to gather all the data that was going to make as strong a case as I wanted to make. And, so I think particularly in science that's become, quite beneficial. And we've seen, I think cases where people have published results and other people have gone and said, hey, I think you've actually taken... the wrong approach to this data, and if you actually, look at it from this perspective, it's actually telling us something different, so it's not necessarily, I sort of certainly want to shy away from any suggestion that it's sort of round about dishonesty, but it's like, actually, how do we verify and evaluate the stuff which is happening?
Open supports trust but verify. The concept of trusting somebody, but at the same time making it possible for the trust is reinforced by the fact that you can verify the results as well, and anyone can do it.
And it's also reinforced if someone whose perspective has verified it is there.
I think we've actually jammed back. Where I was going is actually part of what we were talking about, which is cool. But I was just going back to your definitions up there. You said open's about releasing control. Isn't it more about, I suppose it depends which end of the telescope you are, but isn't it about gaining control? And talking to what's been said either side of me, one of the cool things about open is, that feature that Microsoft won't implement for the next 20 months? Well, I need it now, but I don't and I think there's this sort of vision in people's heads, this scary vision that if I go open, I've got to do it all myself, I've got to be able to program. People, throw that, you can change it yourself. Actually, It just means you can find someone who knows how to change it and get them to change it for you.
And it only takes one.
Absolutely. And you don't have to wait 20 months for someone to think, is this something I can sell to anybody? You want that niche thing? You can have it. And that's really cool about Open. And thank you for getting me there, guys. Because sorry, one more. The other thing that's been talked about a bit in this, and again it came up, was how do we know which of the open projects is the one to go to? Straight question to Dave. Does the Open Source Society have a role here? Do you have a thing where we can go and look and rate stuff?
One of our intended initiatives, for very briefly, straying off topic, but one of our initiatives is to implement what's been referred to as a 5-star system for open source software to try to both classify its level of openness, and also we can perhaps look at how you can create metrics to judge for yourself more easily the validity or value of the software.
Whether the pain's worth it.
Tracy, I'll come in after you if you like, Tracy. I just want to check in a thing that I've observed in a completely completely other realms around epidemics and why people make behavioural changes, is that the best idea, the highest quality, doesn't always or even often win. Malcolm Gladwell synthesised it in a book called The Tipping Point and looked at social epidemics. And you have people in there about how things like the common cold are passed, or whether Huggies, not Huggies, what are those boots called? Ugg boots are fashionable or whatever, wasn't that? Or something like that. Huggies, yeah, well, actually, the move to
They're very similar. Yeah.
using disposable nappies, all sorts of things. But he looked at the role of people who are connectors, mavens, and salespeople and the thing. So the people who, I've got a lot of information, I'll go to that person. The people who put the networks together say, I know where to find that. And the people who sell, the ones who say, you've got to do this is the best way forward. And I think I'll chuck the challenge out there. I'm really interested in choice architecture. There's another book which I love called there's Nudge and Switch, How to Change When Change is Hard. And the way that you get a change towards open by default, not open, I suspect it's a combination of someone setting principles like at a government level saying, hey, government's going to go open. And there are a lot of reasons where I think things like Silver Stripe are based on open source. I'm not sure. Some of our common capabilities that we in internal affairs, not me personally, are responsible for are based on open source, and so that helps trend it that way.
And there's also NZ Goal.
Yep, NZ Goal. We do that too. Also, not something that's
It's moved to LINS now.
Yeah. Other end of town.
New Zealand Government Online Access
Government Online Access Licensing. Yeah, so I think actually, and coming back to business models, I worked for a while before the earthquakes, part-time for a small IT company that sold mostly expertise, and that you actually pay someone to be an expert in it. And I mean, law is open source. You can go to the actual statutes, there they are. It doesn't do you any good unless you've got a lawyer to interpret and recommend what your actual course of action is. And you can teach yourself stuff, but actually, it's something around getting tipping points, around having expertise and people you trust, and other people saying, a bit like the Facebook, change your status to a rainbow. We were doing the collectivism, selectivism thing yesterday. Unless enough people trust say, hey, this is the way to do it. And at the moment, all the call goes to, probably heads to Apple or Galaxies or whatever. It might go away from open. But I think the actual why people, I saw Dave, that shiver ran down his spine. Why people do stuff is actually often a function of the architecture of choice and the options that are around them and what they see other people doing. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And so it is like people saying, oh, well, I don't know, not shaming, but saying, I'm proud to be open or proud to whatever, I don't know. It's probably a social epidemic you're looking rather than a technological one. So, anyway. Tracy.
I kind of forgot what I was going to say, but just going on from what what you were saying, I guess that's what I'm looking for too, is a cultural change imperative. And I guess I was sitting here as you were saying, you were talking, and I'm thinking, it would be really cool if we had some kind of badge that meant that students want to come to University of Waikato because we're the only open source, completely, university, and somehow that generated more EFTs, and maybe that would be a good way to, get our institution on the map, or things like that. I mean, maybe we don't want to do that, but
you got to lean into the selling point. Southland did the zero fees. This is kind of like zero course costs.
Yeah. That kind of, I don't know. I mean, we've got standards out there, right? But I'm just wondering if there is something that we could, like. The green buildings idea. Here's an open source business, and like the heart tick or whatever that might identify more visibly identify and make open source really cool and not just niche.
There was a conference in Wellington a few months ago called the Open Source Open Society Conference, and the thing that amazed me about that was that there was a huge attendance from people who I would consider sort of the young up-and-comers, as opposed to the old crusty battle-scarred people like me. And I was amazed at how, on one hand, they had huge, bountiful energy and enthusiasm, and they were kind of what defines cool in our society. I think the hipsters were running rampant, and I just the only thing that concerned me was that the message of openness had been very much diluted. These people were all running around with their MacBook Pros and talking about how open they were, when they in fact were not quite getting the open side of it. But
is there a? I'm just coming back to the
no
old.
offense.
Perfect is the enemy of good, though. So, do you want to be open in all things, or where does it matter?
I was asked at that conference to define the term open. What does the word open mean? And one of the things that so Jaakko before was talking about the values of openness, and one of the things that I acknowledged is that you can't open everything all at once because of the kind of incentives and the inertia and stuff that we discussed previously. But what you can do as a principle is you can say, I'm using this thing and I acknowledge that it is not as open as it could be. And rather than feeling proud of the fact that you're an Apple user or you're a whatever user, what you can do is you can say, I'm using this until my priorities shift around to the point where I can justify becoming more open. But the thing is, it's recognizing that what you're doing is not as good as it could be. It's the key. The key is that it's a source of it's an opportunity for improvement and moving towards openness, as opposed to being confident or being complacent, I guess, or considering that the job is done because you've achieved an apple.
Yeah, I kind of. Sorry, I'm speaking a lot, but I just want to come. I'm completely not in this space, Dave. I'm just village idiot as usual. I would be less bothered by the fact. I like using my apples, I have to say. They feel nice, they work well, and they're beautiful. But I think I think it's more important the things I create with them, I create for public good and enable other people to build on, that I'm using everything open all the time, or supporting businesses that are. It's kind of like you're voting with your money by supporting business that's not open. So there's that aspect, and I guess I would personally put the priority on adding to. I hadn't thought about it out loud until I just said that, but it's really hard to go away from my beautiful, functioning, nice machine that makes me feel happy.
With the velvet handcuffs. That
yes. That's so good, though.
Until you reach the boundaries of the velvet handcuffs, they feel really comfortable. But as soon as you hit them, you realize how deeply, deeply trapped you are by them.
So
fences make comfort, though.
Go.
I'm a... Yeah, sure. Sorry, it's on, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I'm a sociologist primarily, which means that I spend most of my time with my head in the clouds compared to a lot of the practical issues that some of you would be dealing with in this area. But I also spent the last 6 years in the Middle East in the Arab Spring. So I know what you mean when you're talking about things like the tipping point and stuff like that. I think it's just important to bear in mind that a lot of the kinks and issues that we might encounter in developing open source and things like that with regards to media and products and services and all these other things are partly a manifestation of the fact that while communication has been cracked open with the internet and things like that, other spheres of society like finance, like politics, like production and manufacturing and other things have not, or at least are lagging way behind. And when you have such a schism between different parts of society and the way they operate and the systems in place, that tends to cause all sorts of issues. But as we also know, systems tend to, over a long period of time, engineer their own demise and build the next thing. And I think that's what we're seeing. So I just think that's something to remember when we talk about all these small issues, because there certainly is a tipping point, but it's not a tipping point everywhere all at once. Sort of tangentially related note, I just wanted to mention as well, in terms of success stories, I don't know if anybody's heard of it before, but there's a website called Synapse.org, which is a collaborative enterprise between a whole bunch of genetic and medical researchers all over the world, where they do in fact upload all of their research data towards finding cures, and it's a collaborative workspace where research is conducted and all sorts of things. All sorts of really good things. There was one other thing. I might not get the microphone back, but I also wanted, in terms of specifically web-based stuff and open source software and media and things, I wanted to ask about the difference between delivery of prestige versus consumer goods or services, and whether that's part of it. People have mentioned the issue of monetization and so forth. But is that part of the discussion as well?
Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Prestige versus... open has historically been and will continue to be a commoditizing force, because what it does is it removes the barriers. It removes the... It removes the gradient of access, which is inherent in prestige versus mass market things, because everyone can have the prestige thing, so it ceases to have prestige because it's ubiquitous, and or at least it can be ubiquitous. There's no barrier to entry. So a lot of times, people who buy the expensive thing because it gives them prestige cease to have a sense of prestige when everyone can afford it. And that's kind of one of the paradoxes of open. But what it does is it allows people to use the tool that would have been prestigious to build new things that have prestige or convey prestige, if that makes sense.
So is there a way to get towards the tipping point, to start to load the seesaw in such a way that we could actually start to tip?
I'll have a go. It depends what sector we're talking about, right? So we've got all these different opens on the board, and they've all got different structures to them and different solutions and different... we're going to have to adopt different strategies to get open to become common practice across those different sectors. Talking about prestige, the research sector is one that's been pretty difficult to encourage people to adopt openness. I suspect that one of the ways that we're going to have to adopt is actually mandating academics to publish openly. It's not just going to happen voluntarily. I think there's been some studies that have shown that voluntarily about 10 to 15% of people, academics, are voluntarily depositing their work in a repository to make it open. But as soon as mandates come in place, that jumps up to about 90%. So that's one example. There's a bunch of other things we could talk about for those other sectors, though.
Anyone else have anything they want to say?
So that's one sector, research, and so mandates will be the cure you think there, or a cure. Other sector. So anyone want to talk to maybe free culture, open glam sector maybe? We've got any glam left? Has all the glamour left the room? Okay.
I just wanted to say I completely agree with Matt. I think the idea that to a large extent the change will be most strongly motivated by changes to actual regulation by governments. Governments being convinced that openness is a better value and a lower risk, which I think very compelling case can be made. And I think that we're already starting to see governments recognizing that they're effectively being subjected to things like monopoly rents and so on, and very low value for money, particularly but also constraints on freedom, constraints on access for people, and so on. And I think that what we need to do is lobby government to exercise its duty to regulate things that are not self-regulating. And closedness is more profitable than openness, there's no question. But openness undermines closedness, the ability to remain closed. So it's just sort of a interesting paradox.
It was mentioned before, and I just wanted to pick up on the idea of risk, because I think that there is still quite a bit of, or perceived risk, whether it's real or not. And you know, I work in the education sector, but our IT department doesn't necessarily, you know, it will do things if it sees the outcome as low risk, because we're really risk averse. And, you know, when we were talking about Microsoft 365, we were doing it because everybody else was. So there's a sort of, you know, there would have been a risk in not doing it. And there wasn't... So, yeah, I'd like to see some more work around getting rid of that perceived risk around open.
I think, just thinking, I think you're absolutely right when it comes to... I mean, there's the old... I think it came up at last year's NetHui. No one went broke contracting. No one got fired for contracting IBM, was the thing. And there are a lot of people who are working... I suspect I'm not in a core IT role, but I suspect there's a lot of people who've got that sunk cost of training and the area that they're familiar with and all. A risk doesn't have to be real. It just has to react with your nervous system enough to make you get the fair response to act on it. And... yeah, it's until I think you make those in Monopoly Rents Express and put a dollar figure on it, that starts to become more compelling. Kevin's got something from online, no, please.
Quick one from online that I thought was relevant right now, and it's a disagreement, not from that online, from the Twitter sphere. But I disagree that open source avoids prestige, and the culture around open source tries very hard to recreate that prestige. That's from our friend with the classy shoes down in Dunedin.
Is that Blair McBride? Hi, Blair. Richard from online has just said academics will only change if they see benefit in doing it, or they are mandated to do it but will grumble and hate it. It's a fairly universal. If you make me, I'm going to grumble. It's kind of a human instinct, I think.
I can totally relate to that. My wife had the job of convincing academics in the UK to move their research to open licenses. Yeah. It was a job. Just a couple of comments on the risk, and I totally agree with you. I used to work for a computer sales outfit, and a sales strategy was what they call FUD. Introducing fear, uncertainty and doubt. Open source can reduce risk. It was certainly one of the reasons that we moved to the software we're using at the moment, was because it was open source and reduced our risk. And finally, the public generally is very poor at evaluating risk, as are journalists. And that, I think, is again something like a society of professionals like the Open Source Society can perhaps add value.
There's a fundamental problem with openness, and that is that it's very easy for someone to gainsay. That it's very easy for it to become a your word against mine situation. So, for example, if someone is already entrenched as the credible, respected party, the Microsofts of the world, I suppose, are respected in certain circles, and when they say that there's a big risk associated with anybody being able to read your source code, people like the Department of Internal Affairs, I'm told, believe that, even though it's been very widely disproven that most of the security software in the world is actually open source, and for the reason that anyone can find problems and insecurities in it, and correct them as opposed to exploit them. So yeah, there are lots of, we also have to recognize that there's an inherent power balance between closed and open right now. As I said in the document here, closed is definitely more profitable in any place where open doesn't already thrive. And as a result of that profitability, there's a lot of money for marketing. And what you do when you market is you effectively slag the competition, which in this case is generally open. And so if you slag it to people who are willing to consider you credible, then you can delay the inevitable of them realizing that they've been getting fleeced by your closed stuff.
I'm just wondering, thinking. Go.
Sorry. I was going to ask you, because you mentioned the UK and moving to open access, do you want to describe what made the UK government move to that space?
No, I'm afraid
No.
afraid I can't get to that. It was not something I was looking at the time.
Yeah, probably have to fight. Well, not.
But certainly, as far as academics and research is concerned, there's very much a strong movement towards that with a long number of universities.
It's when people, I think, tipping points where people who are trusted build the common belief, a bit like the rainbow on Facebook. I know that was Facebook's tool, but anyway, the social belief that it's bloody ridiculous that government-funded research isn't widely available. This should be. Why is this not happening? And then enough people say, why is this? And people start to be criticised for being secretive and closed. And I've just taken the basic foundation of law, for all that we have copyright and TPP and all the rest of it. The foundation of copyright is the assumption that everything is open and things are narrowed for a reason for a limited time, just to allow people to get enough profit to make it worthwhile. But the actual underlying assumption is that is actually open, not closed. Same with government and the Official Information Act. The underlying assumption is everything is open. Then things happen in practice around risk and various that change behaviour. I wonder if what might make a tipping point would be, at the moment, does everyone still email a lot, or is that mostly where you get your spam emails from people? My mother sends a letter every Sunday night that I love to all the family, but otherwise my email is where I get marked. Max tells me that there's 40% off today. And so I vaguely scan it. At work I use it a lot, but at home it's kind of gone. And I'm wondering if actually, rather than people overcoming the sunk cost of expertise in particular programs that are not open, if the actual change will come when people transition away from that to something else, which is, and actually it's the obsolescence of a platform, of a closed platform, will be what changes. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But
ironically, email is probably one of the most open platforms we have. It's all based around open standards and open source software.
And instant messaging? I don't
Less
know.
so.
Less so. Yeah, well then. So actually the other way around.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Anyone have any thoughts on that?
No. Now have we got anything? Richard's got some stuff. Academics don't realise they aren't open. So maybe that's another thing people don't. They assume they're actually I until this week thought that, didn't realise there was a distinction between free and open. And I'll be vain enough to assume I'm not the only one. Is that part of it too? Actually having people knowing that they're closed, a bit like people might be. We've seen it in workers' rights in Bangladesh. That people want their cheap clothes from Primark or wherever, and they're happy to pay $20 for a jacket, until enough people realise that that's a child in Bangladesh who's stitching in for 16 hours a day, and it's kind of until it actually surfaces what's actually the consequences are. Is that something?
Well, just really in one line. That suggests that the visibility, and I suppose that's what Tracy was talking about earlier in terms of institutional visibility. But one of the reasons that we started, or that we had the plan of starting this session with people talking about their definitions of open, was I certainly had a presumption that there would be a number of different definitions, a number of different perspectives on what openness is. And I think, what Richard's saying there is, people can read this, they can go to a library and read the journal, so therefore it's open. And because for most people who are reading research papers are already at a sort of higher ed institution where they have subscribed to all of these papers and are paying for them and such like,
Probably want to start with
Yes, in New Zealand you can go to a library and you can get into the research databases and it doesn't cost you anything. That is because New Zealand is, I think, one of about 2 countries in the world that has negotiated a nationwide license to a number of those research databases.
Yep. I think that's EPIC, is it?
It is EPIC,
yeah.
Yes.
Electronic Purchasing in Common, run out of, sorry to plug it again, National Library.
My wife helped.
Yay for
Does anyone else? I just wanted to say that one of the things that you, Tracy and Nigel have been saying, I think, is the idea that one of the greatest ways of encouraging openness is to shine light on what closed looks like. And I think there's a beneficent instinct that people have to assume the best of things that they don't know. And for example, I frequently alert people that every Microsoft Word document, for example, that they create is creating another proprietary document which can't be read by anybody who's not using Microsoft Word, really. And they think, well, but Microsoft's an open standard because everybody uses it. And they don't realize how pervasive the impingement on their freedom is. It's one of these things that if you can't see the wall, then you don't think it's there. If you can't see the bars on the windows, then it's easy to assume that you could get out of the window if you wanted to. And what we need to do, I think, in the open movement is to shine a light on, sunlight being the best disinfectant, just to shine a light on what it means for closedness, just to have case studies of people who have run into the bars thinking that they weren't there. And we have some very nice examples of how this stuff has actually worked. Like in the UK, for example, in the UK, they put out a tender for software procurement. And one of the respondents came back with a $4 million price tag on their response, and it was a Microsoft partner. Another software vendor came back, and their proposal was on the order of £60,000. And it was meeting the equivalent set of requirements. And theirs was an open source software one. And I believe that was in large part the trigger for the UK government to say, well, why the hell are we using this Microsoft stuff? And why are we paying through the nose for the privilege of using something like this? And that ended up in the UK government doing something that I would like the New Zealand government and every other government of the world to do, which is to mandate the use of open standards. Because what that does is it levels the playing field for open. Whereas at the moment, the closed people use their influence and their wealth to tilt the playing field in their favor. They use their control to tell you what you believe. And so I think the key thing we need to do in the open sphere is to simply make ourselves aware of the parts that interest us as to where the bars actually are, and to point them out to people so that they are more aware of the infringements of their freedoms.
So I'm conscious we've got about 10 minutes. No, we haven't even got 10 minutes left. That's Kevin. Yeah. So yeah, I was just going to say that I was going to say that we're probably at the point where we want to start wrapping up. So I don't know whether the people have got any statements they want to make to try and summarise their thinking on particularly on next steps. But anything that we've discussed.
I'm going to put Dave on the spot slightly again. You came up with a sort of statement, and I tried to paraphrase it on Twitter, but failed miserably. I'd love to see that written down and stuck in the document, and we can all stand behind that. I'm being as open as I can right now, and
Right.
You know that one? Go nail it to the door of the church.
Beneficent instinct. I think bonus for David Amy Adams used with beneficent.
Yeah.
I like it.
No, I think that'd be a great way to summarise this session.
So, Dave, can you remember what it was? No pressure.
Yeah.
Lots of pressure.
It's the idea that we can't become all open all at once because closed has such a lot of inertia. We all have to pick we all have to pick our fights, but the key thing is to recognize that when we need to recognize closed when we see it and recognize that it's not as good as open.
That was it. You can nail that one to the door as we leave.
Cool.
You got Mike?
It's not exactly a closing statement, but when I was in the UK looking at education and the information and sort of what was being used in government and as they're moving to the cloud and things, and one of the things was about like security concerns where like Microsoft is the only person that, well, I can't remember my sources, but it was perceived that Microsoft was the only people who could provide like a closed stack of like all-in-one security, and I guess it's the wrong end of the stick, but that was the perception like of in the sort of education place where I was working, and that's the perception, yeah. So security, I think, and like making it seem safe to use.
Yes, there's a lot of vested interests involved in that sort of a pronouncement. Yes.
And maybe that's in terms of those lights that might get shone on different areas. Maybe that's one of the areas that we need to consider, particularly if we're making arguments for openness, is, you know, what are the counter arguments, or what are the perceptions that other people have, and how do we make sure that we've got the things to, you know, shine light into that space and say, actually, this is really what it's like, and this is really what it's like over here.
I would love to see us identify or help to build credible institutions that can hold the flashlight, that are the ones who can say, we are going to shine this light because we have an impeccable reputation. We have always gone about doing things in a fair and credible and objective way. And unlike marketing, which in my opinion is another word for lying, what we can do is we can provide information in a way that doesn't strive to get you to buy something. It simply strives to give you information that allows you to decide what you should buy.
I would think I'm background law marketing. It's all persuasion. Education is another form of education, marketing, advice, all the same thing, using the same techniques. So, yeah, that would be my comment.
Yeah, so maybe lying isn't quite the right word, but misdirection, misrepresentation, allowing people to develop misconceptions and encouraging them to do so.
Yeah, I think I've lost it. I was going to say there's something a beneficent approach to using the tools for good.
Yeah.
So in the chat, Richard said that certainly one of the next steps for education is to mobilise for Open Access Week later this year. And I suppose that reminds me that 3 years ago now, during Open Access Week, which is an international event to celebrate open access in research papers, myself and some colleagues ran a week of events at our university. And from that, some people on the research committee who were already interested in the idea of open access, they were producing open source software, put forward a proposal that all our research papers would be published in our open access database. It took nearly 2 years for that to work its way through various committees and such like, but eventually that was enacted. So we now have a mandate for all researchers to publish their research outputs into our open access database. And to some extent that came from, you know, a small group of people who had the energy to put on this, you know, this week of events and just raise the profile enough that it allowed other stuff to happen. It was still, you know, even in university terms, fairly glacial to take that 2 years to work its way through the system, but it did happen. And so sometimes I think, you know, it's, you know, Tracy was describing how do we make the whole institution open, and it might be that we do that by taking small steps in different areas, but continuing to be as visible as we can be.
Yeah, just picking up on that reminded me that small steps where you can be, pick the softer targets.
Low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, well, here's an example. Like in the little IT firm that I work for as a non-IT person, when you give quotes for the server and the hardware and the operating, you know, the normal Windows suite, people find it hard to give up Windows, but they were pretty damn quick to give up the expensive server and go for Linux instead, because they couldn't see it. And once you get the start quoting saying, well, you could do this, or we can charge you for these licenses, and those licenses start to feel more painful. So,
you have to break down the costs so that people can see where the value is being allocated. But that's,
There's marketing techniques, though.
Yes, that's right. It's bundling. But so there's a danger to free as a people seeing open and free as synonyms. There's a danger to that, because then they think that something that costs them nothing is as good as something that's open. But I think it's very important to recognize that often when something is being given away for free, it's being given away for free so that you don't take something that's open.
Yeah, and that just reminds me that if something is free, you have to value expertise. Someone yesterday in the collectivism, selectivism, well, we did the marriage equality campaign and it only cost $500. $500 and a hell of a lot of expertise, which needs to be valued as well. So it's valuing the actual knowledge. And so rather than outsourcing the risk to the brand and Microsoft and the value that the halo effect that has, you outsource the risk to your trusted IT provider who's working in an open way. Yeah.
Anybody who hasn't spoken have anything they want to add, even if it's not necessarily on topic? It's observations.
Sorry, Phil? Yeah.
I have spoken before.
That's all right.
What I'd really like to see as a sort of winding up is where we go from here. You've mentioned the Open Access Week, which is great. Is there anything else that the Open Source Society is doing, or affiliated societies?
With the assistance of membership fees from people in here who might be interested in it, $40 a year. The Open Source Society is very keen to do things like I mentioned earlier, or I alluded earlier to the fact that I will be publishing a website that I've written up. It's sitting on my laptop right there, but I'll be pushing it out to the wider world called openstandards.nz. And the goal of that will be actually to pressure the New Zealand government to mandate the use of open standards, not to recommend, but to mandate, because recommendation is very easily ignored by people who have enormous incentives to be closed, or to adhere to closed standards, because it vastly increases their profit. So what I want to do is create an opportunity for people to lend their names in support. So it's basically we're gonna create a petition. Just for the record, we did a very similar thing for the Patents Act a few years ago, where software developers were invited to sign a document which said that we do not want New Zealand to have the ability to patent software anymore, and that was tabled on the floor of Parliament, and it was instrumental in getting the law changed. New Zealand is the first country in the world to actively ban software patents.
And probably just give the last comment to Matt to follow up on things that might be happening.
Yeah, really, really briefly. And we have a volunteer program for people to advocate for Creative Commons policies in their local schools. To encourage resource sharing. So essentially there are 2,500 schools. We've got to about 120 of them, but there's quite a lot to go. So we're asking people in their local communities to use our resources to engage some of their local schools and their local communities in open access licensing for teaching resources specifically. So get in touch if you're interested in that.
All right. So I think from our side here, thanks very much for engaging in this and having the stamina to last through, one of NetHui's first double sessions. Sorry.
Just want to really thank the three guys up the front there, because doing a double session, I've done that on 2 topics before, and that's hell. Really good to get a feedback as to how doing a double session's gone. It's the first time we've tried it, so if people think it was worthwhile, we'll do it again. But no, huge big ups for you guys, because it's shattering.
Thanks, Kevin. So all these notes will be available.
They already are?
They already are, yeah.
Please go and add in correct bits and add some links, so you can go back and actually say, that's I didn't quite say that I said this, and because I was typing and I know I got it wrong, so yeah.
And the more links we put in there, the more opportunities we create for people the threshold for people to explore further, basically.
Yeah.
So if we direct them to things that we know have good information, that helps them to avoid having to search and decide for themselves.
Yeah. And speaking as someone who writes policy briefings and things on other topics from time to time, not on this, and it's often really handy to find a place you can go to find the links. So make it easy for influence policy by providing links that people can go and find stuff and write stuff. It helps.
And also, as a very brief thing, if you guys do want to contribute to the open world and things like open source software, don't think you have to be able to code. Just do things like provide links, improve documentation, correct a typo. All of those things are huge and valuable improvements, and we encourage any contributions. The more you contribute, the more you can claim ownership.
Ask questions as well, so if you tweet someone.
Yes.
And thanks, thanks to Richard and everybody who's been contributing online.
Online contributors. Woohoo!
And thank you for our IT folk for standing the distance to and dumb down sessions.
Thanks very much for making this available to people outside of here.
Lunch, it's good too.
Let's go get some proprietary lunch from Facebook.